And we are back. Welcome to my preview and predictions for Premier League Game Week 35. The top of the table has been decided. As you can see, Liverpool are now glowing gold. The bottom of the table has now been decided with all three of Ipswich, Leicester and Southampton blanked out. But there is still plenty to play for in the Premier League, particularly in the race for Europe. Before we get into it, I'd like to say a massive thank you to our newest members and upgrades for the memberships this week. You can see them on your screen right now. And a reminder for you guys, if you haven't done so already, you can hit the join button at the bottom of your screen to gain access to exclusive predictions for the La Liga, where I can tell you that last week I got 8 out of 10 with 3 correct scores for La Liga. So make sure you do hit that join button so you can see today's La Liga preview and predictions ahead of another weekend in there as well. But as for today, this is the state of play in the Premier League when it comes to previews and predictions. 5 out of 8 after that midweek fixture with Brentford and Nottingham Forest last night, which of course I did actually get wrong, but a decent weekend last weekend all round, and obviously we had the FA Cup as well. So all in all, those are our season scores as things stand. Don't forget to drop a like on this video if you do enjoy all of my prediction series, and subscribe with notifications turned on if you are new around here, because obviously we'll be covering all of the European semi-final second legs next week as well. But without any further ado, let's just get straight into it. The opening fixture of the Premier League weekend takes place tonight. So fantasy football fans, get your teams done today, because tonight we start off the weekend with Manchester City taking on Wolves. And as things stand, Manchester City are unbeaten in their last 8 matches, winning their last 4 in a row, which of course includes that FA Cup semi-final against Nottingham Forest last week. Wolves are on an even better run though. They're only unbeaten in 7, but they have won their last 6 games in a row, all 6 in the Premier League, which actually means that considering just a couple of months ago they were still in the relegation scrap, they could actually finish this season still in the top half, which would be an incredible finish for them. However, I do think that this is probably going to be by far their toughest test so far, because Manchester City do have an incredibly good record in the head-to-head against Wolves. In the last 10 matches, Manchester City have won 8, Wolves have won 2, no draws in the last 10 fixtures, and City did win at Wolves back in the reverse fixture in October. In terms of the team news, there are actually no fresh concerns for either side coming into this one, but good news for Manchester City fans is that Rodri is now back in full training. No suggestion that he's going to be anywhere near this squad, but potentially we could see him in some capacity in the last couple of Premier League games and potentially in that FA Cup final. No returning players for Wolves for this one. To be honest, I do think this is going to be a really entertaining game. It's going to be under the lights, a nice nighttime game. But I do think Manchester City, again, with the position that they're in, they're now solidified in 4th, especially after the result last night. They want to push on to make sure they finish this season strong. They're going to want to finish 3rd in the Champions League places, and they're going to want to win that FA Cup. And I think, even though Wolves have won 6 in a row, I do think this is going to be a game that Manchester City take. I do think it's going to be a fun one, though. I think there's going to be a lot of goals, but I'm going to go for a 3-2 victory to Manchester City. On to tomorrow then, and the first game of tomorrow is Aston Villa taking on Fulham, again in that massive race for the top 5, but more realistically for these sides, the Europa League and Conference League places. It's 7th taking on 8th, and after an incredible run of form for Aston Villa, it's all sort of become a little bit derailed over the last couple of weeks. Obviously, they did end up getting knocked out by PSG. They then lost to Manchester City in a massive game in the race for Champions League places in midweek last week. And then, of course, absolutely obliterated by Crystal Palace in the FA Cup semi-final, meaning that they've gone from a position where they thought they might win the Champions League to they thought they might qualify for the Champions League and win the FA Cup to now they're realistically not going to get in the Champions League and they're out of the other 2 cup competitions. Fulham, on the other hand, were once again putting in a relatively poor performance in front of goal against Southampton last time out, but thankfully due to a very late Ryan Sessegnon winner, were able to secure the 3 points, meaning that they still have some sort of chance of qualifying for, more realistically, the Europa places, rather than having any chance of getting into the Champions League. But there is still a lot to play for them. In terms of the actual team news, again, the only real big absentee for Aston Villa is Marcus Rashford. He looks like he could potentially be missing the rest of the season, maybe playing some football in the last couple of games, but he's certainly not going to make it for this one. Robinson is going to be missing again for Fulham, a knee injury which again could potentially see him miss the remainder of the season, but as things stand it doesn't look too severe, but he's certainly not going to make it for this one. In terms of the head-to-head record, Aston Villa have actually won the last 3 in a row in this fixture, including a 3-1 win at Craven Cottage earlier on this season. I'm going to back that trend to continue here. I'm going for a 3-1 victory to Aston Villa. Now to two sides who realistically are not playing for anything anymore. Everton, of course, in 15th are just meandering towards the end of the season now. They have lost back-to-back games. And Ipswich, of course, confirmed their relegation after a pair of back-to-back defeats for themselves as well. But hey, maybe it just relieves a little bit of pressure coming into the remainder of the season for Kieran McKenna and his side. As I've just said, both of these sides have lost their last 2 matches. What I didn't say is that neither of these sides have scored in those 2 matches either. Although, to be fair, the opposition that they have played is Man City and Chelsea, and Arsenal and Newcastle respectively, so they have had some tough fixtures over the last couple of weeks. In terms of the head-to-head form between these two sides, Everton won the reverse fixture earlier on at Portman Road under Sean Dyche. In terms of the actual team news, it's Ipswich that are going to be without players once again. Ben Johnson will be joining Leif Davis in suspension after his 2 yellow cards against Newcastle. You can have your own thoughts about the dive versus avoiding a tackle debate. In my opinion, it was a yellow card, and the second yellow card is an absolute ridiculous decision from him. For Everton, the only absentee for them is going to be James Tarkowski. He picked up a serious muscular injury last time out, and he will miss the remainder of the season. But the good news for Everton fans is that Dominic Calvert-Lewin could be returning to the squad in some capacity this weekend. I'd be surprised if he starts, but a lot of reports suggesting he could be available in the squad. I think it's going to be a close one. Like I say, the pressure is now a little bit lifted on Ipswich, but at the end of the day, they're still missing an awful lot of players through injuries and suspensions. So I'm going to go for an Everton win. I'm going for a 1-0 victory. Then we have the absolute biggest game of the weekend. It is 19th taking on 20th. Leicester winless in their last 12, losing 11. Southampton winless in their last 11, losing 9. Something has to give. It is the worst 2 teams in the Premier League. It is the arguably, and potentially in a few weeks' time, the worst side in Premier League history in Southampton, taking on a side that is performing even worse than them at the moment. What I would say, again, head-to-head record could be important in this one. Leicester won the reverse fixture at Southampton. They also won both fixtures in the Championship last season, which is prominent because, of course, they're going to be playing against each other again in the Championship next season. But over the last few weeks, there have been a few more positives in Southampton's favour. They're certainly scoring more goals than Leicester in recent weeks. I actually think they're putting in much better performances than Leicester in recent weeks. They've just been a bit unlucky in a couple of matches. And not only that, Leicester have a lot of injury concerns coming out of their result last week. Hermansen, the goalkeeper, is injured. Ricardo Pereira is injured once again. Buonanotte is injured. De Cordova-Reid went off injured last week, but he is the only one that could potentially make it back for this one. Whereas Southampton, no fresh injury concerns for them. Do I think there is going to be a clear winner here? Absolutely not. I think Leicester should win this match based on the ability of the players they still have available to them. But the recent form cannot be overlooked. They are playing absolutely awful at the moment. Their heads look like they've completely gone altogether. And like I said, I think Southampton have been unlucky over the last few weeks. Am I confident enough to say that Southampton are actually going to go and get a win here? No, I absolutely don't. But what I can do is say that I think they can get themselves a draw. And that's where I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. Again, I still think Leicester should win, but I've seen enough over the last couple of weeks to make me think Southampton will come away with at least a point. Now we have an actual game that could be really difficult to call because team selection is going to be the crucial factor here. Arsenal currently sit in second place, Bournemouth obviously in 10th, but the big one for Arsenal is, of course, they lost that first leg to Paris Saint-Germain at home and now have a massive second leg in just a couple of days' time in away at Paris. So they've got to look at this situation and question their actual priorities. As things stand, with 4 games left, Arsenal are 7 points clear of dropping out of the European play, or so the Champions League places, should I say. So they do have to make a slight judgment here, because people are starting to assume that Arsenal are safe from this race. But they've got Bournemouth this weekend. Next weekend, they go to Anfield, and then they've got Newcastle. Like I say, the gap is 7 points. They could easily lose all 3 of these matches if they don't take this game seriously, and they could be dragged right into a position where they could drop out of the Champions League places. Let me know in the comments if you think I'm talking crazy by saying stuff like that. But I'm just saying, a lot of people are assuming Arsenal have already made it. I'm not fully convinced just yet, especially given the fact that, like I say, I would expect Arteta to make big changes ahead of the second leg against Paris Saint-Germain. Bournemouth, on the other hand, are... okay, not particularly doing that great at the moment either. They also have a horrendous record against Arsenal. There's not been a draw in this fixture since 2019, and Arsenal have won every single fixture since Bournemouth got promoted, other than the 2-0 defeat to Bournemouth earlier on this season. So there is remit to suggest that Bournemouth can already beat Arsenal as well. Furthermore, Bournemouth, like I say, have only actually won 1 of their last 10 matches in 90 minutes. Again, we've talked about other games, this, that and the other, when it comes to the FA Cup. But I still think that they can get something from this match. I think they played well against Manchester United last week. I think they would have beaten Manchester United last week if it wasn't for the controversial Evan Nilsson red card, which obviously has been overturned. So he is going to be back and available for this one. There are actually no concerns for Bournemouth whatsoever coming into this one. For Arsenal, it's what I said. There are no actual fresh concerns for them coming into this match. It's just a question of how many players is Mikel Arteta going to rest coming into this one. Furthermore, let's not forget, Arsenal haven't won any of their last 3 matches at home. They drew at home to Brentford, they drew at home to Crystal Palace, and then they just lost at home to Paris Saint-Germain. So Bournemouth have got to be looking at that, thinking they can get a result here. And I honestly think that with the amount of changes that Arteta will make, Bournemouth will get a result here. I'm not going to say they're going to get the win, but like I just said a minute ago with the Southampton-Leicester, I think Bournemouth get at least a point from this fixture unless Arsenal take this game incredibly seriously and put it to bed. I'm going for a 2-2 draw, but we shall see. Arsenal should 100% still be considered the favourites, but let's see those starting lineups before I make that final, or before you guys make your final decision as to where this one is going to go. Speaking of sides taking matches seriously, we now have Brentford taking on Manchester United, and obviously Manchester United will care not one little bit about the result in this one. As we saw last week against Bournemouth, they didn't really put out much effort against Bournemouth last week and still managed to salvage the draw thanks to the late Rasmus Højlund goal, and of course are going to be on a massive, massive high after the 3-0 victory over Bilbao last night. That said, they weren't the only side to grab an impressive away win last night, because Brentford won 2-0 away at Nottingham Forest to keep their chances of qualifying for European football alive. Okay, it's not a massively realistic chance. There's still a lot of points for them to catch up. But there is genuine opportunity for Brentford to extend their good run of form against the Manchester United side, as I said, who are going to have all of their focus set on that second leg against Bilbao. I would expect Ruben Amorim to make some changes to this game. I think key players will be rested. I think we will see a few more minutes for the likes of Ahmad and De Ligt, who made their return last night. For Brentford, again, we mentioned it last night, the only real concern for them is obviously Janelt is now out for the remainder of the season, but no one seemed to pick up any knocks last night. They put in a brilliant defensive and offensive display against Nottingham Forest last night, and I think they're in a position whereby they can definitely extend their good run of form against Manchester United here. What I would say is the head-to-head record against Manchester United isn't great. United have won a fair few of the recent fixtures, including a 2-1 victory in the reverse fixture earlier on this season, and drawing at Brentford last season as well. But who can forget that 4-0 win for Brentford just 2 seasons ago? I think Brentford are going to win this. Obviously, as a Manchester United fan, I'd love to see us get a result here. But again, my priority is making sure everyone is fit for the second leg against Bilbao. Even with a 3-0 lead, we have to make sure we are secure there. So could I see United getting something from it? Absolutely. But for me, this is Brentford's game to lose right now. I'm going for a 2-1 victory to Brentford. Next up on Sunday, it is Brighton taking on Newcastle. And for Brighton, their miserable run of form finally ended last week, although it did take a late comeback against West Ham, which was incredibly frustrating for me, because I did a draw in that match. And when Matoma equalised in the 90th minute, I thought, brilliant, I've got another one absolutely spot on. But Carlos Belieber was having absolutely none of that with an incredible goal around the outside of the West Ham players into the far corner after Ayari had already scored a screamer in the first half as well. For Newcastle, they of course were able to bounce back from their disappointing display against Aston Villa with a 3-0 win over Ipswich Town last week, which did of course relegate Ipswich, and to be fair was also against 10 men for the vast majority of the game. I do think this is a really tough one to call. Obviously, both sides are in their own respective battles for Europe. Brighton still think they can qualify for the Europa places. Newcastle currently occupy third and cannot afford to drop points with how close City and Chelsea and Forest and Arsenal and all of the other teams in and around them are. Obviously, they're going to see how Manchester City had performed the previous day before we actually come into this one, and would have seen how Aston Villa would have played before coming into this one. But I'm not convinced fully that they can get a result here, especially when you consider how many players are starting to come back for Brighton. Veltman's back, Van Hecker's back, Lamptey's back, and a couple of others. Meanwhile, Newcastle looks set to be without Joelinton once again for this one. He missed the game last week. It's unclear whether or not he's going to be back for this one, but we do know they have some decent depth with the likes of Willock and Miley that can fill in that midfield. Brighton, of course, will still be without João Pedro following his red card a couple of weekends ago. I do think that Newcastle should win this game, but Brighton have already beaten Newcastle twice this season already. They won at St James's Park in the league. They won at St James's Park in the FA Cup in extra time. But I am going to back Newcastle to just about edge it. The game against Aston Villa does give me some concern because obviously they proved that away from home they can have these performances where they collapse. But I'm going for a very narrow 2-1 win to Newcastle. We'll see. I think they should be favourites, but Brighton, with European places on their mind as well, could definitely get a result in this one. Now we come to the battle of the sides who are deciding who's technically the worst Premier League team. I say this because let's not forget that Southampton, Ipswich and Leicester are all championship sides that got promoted and have been re-relegated. So essentially, whoever finishes 17th is the worst Premier League side. And West Ham are currently 17th and Tottenham are currently 16th. What's incredible about coming into this game from a West Ham perspective is their current run of form is a perfect lose, draw, lose, draw, lose, draw, lose. So in theory, this one should be a draw to maintain that beautiful run of form. Tottenham, on the other hand, are incredibly on 37 points, but still have a positive goal difference. Such a positive goal difference that it's better than Aston Villa's goal difference, and Aston Villa have 20 more points than them. Incredible how sort of stats like that come out, but they have lost their last 3 games in the league. But to their credit, did of course beat Bodo Glimt in the first leg of their Europa League game last night. That game did not come in without cost though, because it looks like Maddison and Solanke have both picked up more injuries. I'd be surprised if either of them are risked ahead of the second leg next week. West Ham, of course, no fresh injury concerns for them, but like I say, they're not playing that well at the moment. Spurs did win the reverse fixture 4-1. I do think Postecoglou is going to make multiple changes for this fixture with the second leg in mind. Like with Manchester United, it doesn't really matter where Tottenham finish now in the league. Obviously, they'd like to win more matches, but I do think West Ham are going to get something from this game. I'm going for a 1-1 draw, which then takes us to the main event of the weekend. It is Chelsea who will be the first hosts of the new champions of the Premier League, which is Liverpool, which I don't really want to say, but unfortunately reality has now happened, and Liverpool are officially champions. But they do face a tough test here in Chelsea, who are on a decent run of form. They've won their last 2 Premier League games and, of course, got their victory in the first leg of the Europa Conference League semi-final away at Jurgens last night. A 4-1 victory for them there, with pretty much a full reserve team as well. Nicholas Jackson obviously doing well off the bench. Liverpool are on a 3-game winning streak themselves, which has enabled them to wrap up the title. But the question really is how much seriousness are Liverpool going to be taking these sort of fixtures? Like I say, the title's now been wrapped up. They've had the party atmosphere all week. Does that mean they're going to play even better for the remainder of the season, or are we going to see a slight pullback since they don't have any other competitions to play for? They're not in the Club World Cup. They're out of all the other competitions, so it's just some free, relaxing games for them for the remainder of the season. What I would say is I do expect Liverpool to perform at their highest level. I think, again, with the pressure off, you would expect them to still continue to play at the highest level. For Chelsea, they obviously need this result. They're going to have the advantage of knowing how Manchester City, how Arsenal, how Newcastle, how Aston Villa and that have all performed before they play this match. But I do think this is going to be a game that they're really going to struggle to win, especially when you consider they've not actually beaten Liverpool in any competition since March 2021. They have lost they've lost all of their last 3 meetings against Liverpool, including the game at Anfield earlier on this season. But there have been 7 draws as well in the last 10 meetings. So we'll see. For me, even though Chelsea are still in and around this fight, I expect Liverpool to get the result here. I'm going to go for a 3-1 victory for them. And then finally, the Monday Night Football sees Crystal Palace taking on Nottingham Forest. And what a week it has been for these two sides. Crystal Palace, of course, qualifying for the FA Cup final, which could prove a distraction for this fixture. I think Oliver Glasner is going to want to make sure all of his key players are fit for that FA Cup final in a couple of weeks' time. But at the same time, you want to continue to build momentum. And the best way to do that is to keep playing your best players. For Nottingham Forest, they of course lost in the FA Cup semi-final to Manchester City, so they're not going to be there, and they backed it up with that defeat at home to Brentford last night, which now leaves them out of the Champions League places. A season that had gone so well is starting to fall away at exactly the wrong moment. They have lost 4 of their last 5 matches in all competitions, which now sees them in 6th. Obviously, they're going to be continued to be hunted down by the likes of Aston Villa and Fulham and Bournemouth and Brighton and Brentford. So should they be looking further down rather than looking up, especially, again, because they will know how all the other teams in the race for the Champions League places would have already done. What I would say is that the head-to-head record is very strong in Nottingham Forest's favour. Crystal Palace haven't beaten Nottingham Forest since Forest's promotion to the Premier League a couple of seasons ago. Forest also won the reverse fixture 1-0 earlier on this season. In terms of the team news, no fresh injury or suspension concerns for either side coming into this. Like I said, I expect Glasner to play his strongest side this week as he looks to build momentum ahead of that FA Cup final. And to be honest, from what I've seen from Forest over the last couple of weeks, I think Crystal Palace should be considered strong favourites here, and I think Crystal Palace are going to get the victory here. I'm going to go for a 2-1 victory for them, but as we know, anything can happen in the Premier League. As always, let me know your thoughts down in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching, as always. I'll be back again next week with all of my Champions League, Europa League and Europa Conference League semi-final, second leg preview and predictions. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you there.